Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, a Jethro Tull podcast. Today we're taking a look at Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die, released in 1976. My name is Joey Vetter.
My name's Eugene Manko.
This is actually an album that I've always been interested and excited to talk about ever since we started the podcast, and not necessarily because I'm that big of a fan of this album, because I'm not, to be honest, but because this to me has always felt like one of the least discussed Tull albums. How do you feel about that, Eugene?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that many discussions about this one. It's always kind of glossed over.
Yeah, it has always kind of felt like the forgotten Tull album of the 70s to me, because, this is sort of right in the middle of the band's golden age, the classic era, or whatever you want to call it. But this is, aside from the title track, of course, which is sort of a classic, legendary Tull song, this album gets very little love, I feel like. It doesn't get talked about much.
I believe it's just overshadowed by both Songs from the Wood and by its own title track.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels that the album just boils down to that one song, which it doesn't.
And it came at a weird time, too, because it's sandwiched in between Minstrel in the Gallery and Songs from the Wood. And this album is really very unlike either of those. So it's a very weird bridge, because it's not particularly folky, not any more than a typical Tull album, but it's also very different from Minstrel, both kind of musically as well as in tone. So it's kind of a weird transition between those two eras of the band.
Yeah, I think they kind of went back to the War Child era arrangements with lots of strings and elaborate kind of structures.
Mm-hmm.
In the way of arrangements, I feel it's more mature. And they've prepared themselves with it quite well to Songs from the Wood.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned elaborate, because the thing that kind of weighs this album down for me, and I would maybe say for most Tull fans, because I get the sense that there's fairly wide agreement that this is kind of a lesser Tull album among most Tull fans. Although that being said, actually, a couple of years ago, I remember seeing someone on the Tull group on Facebook who said that this is by far his most favorite Tull album, and it's not close. And if I remember right, this guy was American, and he said that when he went to the UK, he went out of his way to visit the A1 by Scott's Corner, or Scotch Corner, whatever it was. I thought that was pretty funny. So shout out to that guy if he's listening. But
cool.
I think a big reason why this is sort of considered a lesser Tull album is that it sounds a little generic. And that's kind of what my complaint with the album is of every Tull album, especially in the 70s, it's the most non-Tull sounding. It sounds more generic rock than usual. But that being said, because of the theme of this album, which is very much about sort of, older style rock and roll, I've always kind of wondered if that was intentional, sort of, to try to go for that, less Tull sound, to try to go for that kind of thing.
I believe it was. And actually, if we take apart these songs, there's a lot in them that makes it a very much a Jethro Tull album. There's so many little things that none other band ever did. And I'm saying it's elaborate because if you take a close look at a song like Quiz Kid or even Big Dipper, you will find that these songs are very much the precursors of what they did in Songs from the Wood in terms of structure, in terms of incorporating different feels inside a single song and making it feel natural.
I can't say I've ever thought of the album that way, so I'll be interested to talk about that on some of those tracks specifically. To me, it kind of, a lot of it comes across as uninspired to me, which is kind of, I think, what weighs it down for me. And I think a lot of the times with bands, it's very obvious when an album is uninspired. You can kind of tell. And I think the fan base at large can tell. So, like, one example that I can think of is Metallica's Saint Anger is sort of an album that is sort of infamous for that kind of thing. And I'm not saying this album is like Saint Anger. I mean, there's a lot of different things happening with that. But that's kind of one example. That being said, though, I want to make clear that I don't hate this album. And I actually like it more than War Child, which is the other album of the 70s I'm not a big fan of. I kind of rediscovered this album when I was in college. I had always kind of written it off when I was a kid, but when I was in college, I started listening to it a lot more. I listened to it quite a bit then. And even though I think it's a flawed album, and it's definitely not one of my favorites. I do think that there's a couple of kind of overlooked songs on here which don't get enough attention that maybe they deserve.
I'm personally also not a massive fan of this album, but I absolutely don't hate it. My friend, the drummer in my band, who I mentioned before, likes War Child really much. He says that this is his second favorite Tull album, actually.
Wow.
So, there are fans of Tull.
He has some interesting Tull opinions from what we've heard on here.
Yeah. I feel that this album could actually serve as a... Someone mentioned in the comments to the War Child episode that War Child could be a good gateway album into Tull. And this one could also be a good gateway album into Tull, because it's got, those little Tull-esque elements that can pull you in and introduce you to the more fanciful, to the more progressive works without feeling overwhelming at first. This one was one of my first Tull albums, because it was one of these few records that we had, and by virtue of being a simpler album, a song-oriented album, and with this kind of a diverse number of moods across the album, it made an impression on me at the time, and it might have been the album that got me into Tull and got me, to notice the other albums and to get more into them. I do have a problem with this album, and it's a different one than yours. It's I don't really like that they tried leaning into the storytelling element in it, and did a lot to kind of pretend that it was a soundtrack to a movie or a story, because that's, I think, where the album kind of suffers.
Yeah, it's very similar to War Child in that respect, because War Child to me is also an album that conceptually it was kind of abandoned halfway through, or that, it consists of remnants of an abandoned project, being the War Child movie, which never happened. And this album is very similar in that this was originally supposed to be the soundtrack to a stage production that the band was going to do, which also ended up never happening. And so the album kind of morphed halfway through. And so what we get is, again, it's kind of a half concept album where we're left with remnants of this story, which was never really told in the way it was supposed to be told.
Yeah, however, on War Child, it's very removed from the film concept. It was intended to be the soundtrack, but even as Ian himself said, it was intended to be a collection of songs that could fit just well enough. However, in here we've got storytelling elements happening within the songs, like the title track and then the following Pied Piper and the Checkered Flag, and the way that it begins with the piece of the title track.
Yeah.
And these storytelling elements kind of feel ham-fisted to me.
I think especially when you look at the comic strip, which was included on the album. So if anybody has ever actually owned this album, they may remember that there's a comic strip on the inside which shows it shows a little story, and it has the track titles sort of bolded within the speech bubbles peppered throughout the story. And I think it's pretty obvious when you listen to the album and you look at that comic strip that it wasn't intended that way, that they sort of just stuck the song titles into the comic strip where they thought it made the most sense. And there's a quote in the Steve Wilson book where Ian says specifically he sort of contests the idea that it was supposed to be a planned out story from beginning to end, and that instead the album's tracks are just kind of reference points along this story, which again is not really sketched out well because it was kind of abandoned halfway through.
That's true, but okay, we'll talk about that, I think, when we come to those specific tracks, which I have a beef with. But it's that, but it's kind of both things at once. We have this half-cooked story that the songs are supposed to fit into, but then we have pieces of the story crammed into the songs, and that is where it doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I see what you mean. What do you think about the cover art?
Well, I mean, it does what it wants to do, doesn't it? It emulates the kind of film poster with the typeface, very characteristic of a film, like a B-movie type film, and the simplistic cartoony type of thing. But I'm not in love with it. It sort of tries to be edgy, but in a safe way, which is, it's one way or the other. You got to choose.
Yeah, I kind of like it and I kind of don't. Like there's things about it I like and things I don't. The thing I don't like is the central illustration, just because number one, I think it's kind of lame, but number two, I don't like how it looks like Ian. And I mean, I think it's supposed to be the character, it's not supposed to be Ian, but it very much looks like Ian. And I think anybody who would look at it would presume that it's Ian.
Of course, that always happens on Tull covers. We've got Aqualung and Too Old to Rock and Roll and Stormwatch and all of these.
The character looks more like Ian on the front cover than he does in the comic strip, in my opinion. And I know that, so there's a lot that's been written about how supposedly the cover was like a reaction to punk music, which this isn't like really a side trip I really want to go too far down, but when punk was coming out, Jethro Tull were sort of part of the progressive establishment that punk and DIY aesthetic was sort of supposed to be rebelling against in the first place. And so a lot of critics saw the sort of Up Yours image on the cover as being directed at punk and that kind of thing. And I mean, I don't know how true that is, and that, to be honest, it kind of feels like a story which is so far removed from my generation that I can't really comment on it. But I know that that's like been a big part of kind of how this cover has been perceived through history. But the thing I want to talk about that I like about it is I just like in general kind of the comic strip pop art aspect of it. I think that's actually pulled off pretty well on the front cover. And I didn't used to think that. I used to think that the shade of yellow on the cover was kind of like a sickening shade of yellow. But for whatever reason, I kind of like it now. So everything aside from the central illustration, I actually quite like. I like the sparseness of it and kind of the pop art feel of it.
Yeah, I like how it is tied together graphically.
Yeah.
It's very kind of hieroglyphic. It stands for itself. It's not a detailed cover art that you'll be sitting and poring over, which is typically the type of cover art I prefer looking at. But it's, you've seen it once, you'll remember it.
Yeah. It's not a cover that you would expect from Jethro Tull. I mean, you compare this one with the last album, Minstrel in the Gallery, it's a very different kind of cover art, so that's pretty interesting. So in the member lineup, we have one of our first changes in quite a while here, with Ian Anderson on acoustic guitar, vocals, and flute, Martin Barr on electric guitar. For the first time, John Glasscock on bass guitar, Barry Barlow on drums, and John Evans on keyboards. So I want to talk a bit about John Glasscock. The main thing that sticks out when I think of him is he, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of Tull fans, he left the biggest mark of any of the Tull bassists, just in terms of his sound and his tone, which was a very distinctive tone, which appears on a lot of the sort of late 70s Tull records. Yeah,
I agree with that. I think some of my favorite Tull bass lines come from John Glasscock.
And I feel like if you did polling of the Tull fan base, at least the Tull fan base online, it feels like most believe that sort of the Glasscock lineup was the best lineup in the band's history. Although I think there's sort of a strong minority who also prefer Jeffrey, but it feels like there's a lot of fan love for kind of this era of the band.
Well, there's a lot of fan love for Songs from the Wood. I think it kind of colors the entire era through that.
But I think certainly there's a big contrast between him and Jeffrey. And I'm not a bass player. I'm not trying to act like I'm, making any judgments about bass because I don't know much about it. But John Glasscock has this very bubbly style of playing, this very sort of upbeat, bubbly style, which is what I would call it. And it really sticks out, where I feel like Jeffrey's bass parts weren't always they were more subtle. I think Jeffrey's parts, they didn't really come to the forefront that often. Whereas John Glasscock, it's very apparent when he's playing, and it really sticks out in your ear.
Yeah, the difference would also be that Jeffrey didn't write most of his parts.
Yeah.
While Glasscock did. So you'll have more personality this way.
Yeah. So this album kind of presents an odd choice for us because, as some of you may know, the Steve Wilson remix wasn't a remix of the actual studio album. It was a remix of the TV special, which was sort of a separate live performance they recorded just for a TV program. So we made the decision to focus on the 2002 remaster when we listened to this, although I think we actually listened to most of both versions anyway. But for all intents and purposes, we're sort of considering that 2002 remaster to be the latest edition of this album. And the reason that they did that for the TV program, in case anybody didn't know, I actually didn't know until we started looking into preparing for this, was that they weren't able to find the full multi-tracks for the original album. So that's why they weren't able to remix the entire studio album.
Yeah, I think the TV version is not bad at all. I mean, listening to that is very instructive. You hear details that you wouldn't notice in the original studio version, and maybe vice versa, because the parts in some places are different. So unlike the Passion Play remix, which I kind of was adamant about being a secondary version of this album, to me it feels like these two versions complement each other very nicely. They are like two halves of a very nice experience.
Yeah, my only comment on the TV mix is that it feels very much like a live in-studio version of the album. And so it doesn't really sound like a studio album to me compared to the actual album. And so for that reason, I sort of prefer the original studio.
It does kind of sound like a live in-studio version, which is, I think it wasn't anyway. Mm-hmm. But that's what kind of makes it fun for me.
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly valid, alternate mix of the album, which is always good to have. Track 1, Quiz Kid. So the very first thing I want to ask you about is what your feelings are on sort of the prelude intro, where you have the verse of the title track at the very beginning of the album.
Yeah, that's one of those storytelling elements which I feel are kind of overdone on this album. I would prefer not having this prelude because it doesn't sound really any different from the title track, apart from the last chord when we kind of resolve where we didn't. But beginning with the first chords of Quiz Kid would have had so much more punch.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the album would have been such a stronger opening to just start on that opening riff, because it's such a good riff, I think.
Yeah.
This is a song that I actually think is quite good. I think this is one of the better tracks in the album, maybe one of the more overlooked tracks.
I do agree. I think the lyrical side of it doesn't seem terribly exciting. I mean, it's all there, there's very little double meaning in it to be glimpsed. It is a song about game shows.
Yeah.
And as a song about game shows, it actually sounds quite modern. I think maybe, I don't know about American audiences, but to a British audience, definitely, because there's tons of game shows these days still, and I think some of them have already been running in 1976, like, I don't know, University Challenge or Mastermind. I believe these are very old, or like Countdown.
Yeah, I think parts of it are clever lyrically. Like, I like the whole thing about come back next week at the end. I think that's kind of clever. I also think this is kind of a criticism of the album in general, but I think tracks like this one and also the next one and other tracks, sometimes the vocabulary just gets too grandiose. It just it just feels too over the top, like especially in this song when he's talking about, he kind of has that long line about brain cells splattered on the wall and that kind of thing.
I don't know, I think that's just Ian. I think that this is, to me, it's very much a part of Ian's songwriting.
Yeah, I agree. Just on this album, and I felt this a little bit on Minstrel in the Gallery too, I mentioned, but just sometimes it just feels just too much to me.
It does feel dialed down on the following two albums.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This is kind of the thing that I enjoy about his songwriting.
One thing,
way with words.
The quiet acoustic bridge on this song, I think it kind of drags a little bit. when it gets kind of it feels sort of slower, and it's not bad. Just I feel like it drags the song a little bit.
Well, I don't know. I like it. Musically, I think this song is chock full of fascinating things.
Yeah.
Like it switches fast between this kind of, the verse is a brisk acoustic-driven riff, and then we've got a sort of a late Latin feel, which I think you mean the slower part, and the chorus that just rocks out straight.
Yeah.
Oh, do you mean the acoustic, like the middle eight with that orchestral feeling marching drums in the background?
Yeah, with the march drums in the back.
I don't know. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that there are very elaborate songs on this album. You've got 4 different feels in this one.
When it goes into the bridge, like where it very suddenly goes into the da 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 da. It that's a very progressive bridge, and it's one of those things where if you thought that this sounded a little too AOR, a little too classic rock, then that bridge is kind of one thing that reminds you that this is a Jethro Tull album.
Sure. How do you feel about the double bass drumming?
Oh yeah, there's it doesn't stick out to me that much. I think the double bass in the next track actually sticks out more. But yeah, it's the drum tracks in this album. They are quite interesting, but I can't really say they're interesting enough to where they really stick out in my mind, I guess. But there are some sort of trademark weird Barry Barlow parts all over this album.
I like the brass.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. There's brass and string.
Song, yeah. I think the kind of the little brass tabs in the chorus are brilliant use of texture, because they're very sparse. They don't lean into them. They don't make it a brass-centered song. It's just enough to make things a little different, and I think that's a brilliant use of orchestral textures.
One thing I thought was funny is in the commentary in the Steve Wilson book, when Ian talks about this song, he makes a particular point of noting how he's revising the title from 2 Z's to 1.
Oh, yes.
Which I thought was very funny, that he went out of his way to note that.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why he's got his necks in a twist so much about that extra Z, because, what's the problem with that? He made that decision back then. Does it really seem so silly to him that he took care of it in the remastered version?
Yeah, I like the 2. I think it gives character.
Yeah. Speaking of textures, there's also a brilliant little string texture in the fade out. Yeah, which I like very much.
It is kind of, one of the aspects of the album which feels a bit soundtracky in sort of walking you from one place to the next.
It does, but also most of the time the strings are really, really clever.
I'm assuming they used the same War Child ladies on this one. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't think they're credited actually in the booklet.
Which, speaking of which, we forgot to mention that this was the second of 2 albums that was recorded in Manko. So even though Ian didn't like Manko apparently in Minstrel in the Gallery, they went back to do this album yet again. So this is the second Manko album.
I think in a way thematically it feels like Manko rubbed off on Ian enough to kind of create this album, because not in a direct way, not that he's addressing specific things about Manko or about the people that he saw there, but I think the overall mood of it is a little more rowdy, a little more in your face than Minstrel in the Gallery. Well, Minstrel in the Gallery was also in your face, but in a kind of an acerbic way, while this one is a little bit devil may care.
Yeah, the tone is totally different from Minstrel in the Gallery for me. Minstrel was very somber and serious, and this is, again, kind of like War Child. It's kind of getting back to more lighthearted, silly Tull. Although I forgot 2 of the tracks were recorded in Brussels. So the title track and the Chequered Flag were from separate sessions in Belgium.
Yeah, that's true. Track 2, Crazed Institution. This, I'll say it up front, this is probably one of my favorite tracks on this album. I love it very much. It's got a very interesting harmony, because it's sort of static, but it moves within a single chord between different tensions, like sus chords, what they're called. And It's more obvious on the remixed version than it is on the original studio version, but the harmony is actually, most of the harmony is actually delivered by the bass guitar.
Yeah.
The electric guitar just adds a little bit of color, but the bass holds it together, not in the rooting way, which is the typical role of a bass guitar, but bass guitar has a harmonic role in this, where John plays intervals.
Yeah.
And you could conceivably remove the electric guitar from it and it will still hold together. It will just have less color and less interest to it.
Yeah, that stuck out to me too. I've never thought of it sort of in the proper technical terms, but yeah, the bass guitar very much holds it together.
Yeah, and in the pre-chorus, where it goes before "And You Can Wear a Crown of Roses," which is the bass does a beautiful little counterpoint where the melody goes up several times and the bass goes down at the same time, like lower and lower.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how they are holding off on the drums in this one.
Yeah.
Because it's a very different technique than we've heard on lots of like Minstrel in the Gallery songs, where we've had Ian just playing an acoustic guitar, and then the bass came in, then the piano or the electric guitar came in, and then the drums came in, and everyone just started playing a groove, a rhythm together. Right, in this song, when the drums come in, they first start contributing to the tension. They are not delivering a groove, like a straightforward groove that would provide a kind of a dynamic rhythmic resolution. It goes with that little hi-hat with these quick notes that add more tension to the already quite tense harmonic structure, which makes the chorus when it comes in with the actual kind of rhythm that much more powerful.
Yeah, I was going to mention the drum part because it's very strange in this song, and kind of a typical Barry Barlow part where he's playing something that you would never really think. I mean, if you were a typical drummer, I guess, to think on a song like this, where when he does come in, he comes in very strong, playing 30-second hi-hat notes, which is really weird. I mean, you just would never really think to play that on a song like this.
And I think on the last verse, when we have these stops, he's playing a very melodic line before he returns to the rhythm, which is also, I think, quite brilliant. Like the drum part he's playing is part of the melody and not part of the rhythm.
Yeah, this is a song that's grown on me a lot, where I didn't think much of it when I first listened to it. It was one that I skipped pretty often, but I've kind of learned to appreciate it now, because it's a very odd song. Like, it just sounds very odd, and to me, I would describe it as it feels like just fragments sort of together, but it kind of works in a way, and it's kind of charming in its own way.
It works because it kind of, to me, it's the song that keeps you listening.
Yeah.
Because of the harmony, because of the way that the instruments are layered. I think you can hear the drums slightly better on the TV version, actually. They are more up front. And what I don't like on the TV version, there's a very cool piano chord moment. I think it's in one of the last verses. It's got a very teeny kind of jangly piano chords played just to punctuate, just to make little accents. I don't mean the piano that just goes ding on the chorus. I mean the ones that don't even sound like a piano, slightly on the side, offbeat. So, and that part is completely missing from the TV version.
I was going to mention about the keyboard that it feels like there's a lot less keyboard on this album compared to a lot of Tull.
Less keyboard, more strings, more tambourine.
Yeah, and when the keyboard is playing, not always, but a lot of the time it just kind of feels like noodling. So there's a specific part in this song I can think of. It's an organ part on the studio version where it's just it's just kind of soloing, over the song in the back.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think John is a brilliant noodler.
Yeah. But that always struck me how there's a lot of Tull albums that have a lot of keyboard, whether it's organ or synth or piano or whatever, and it's all
well thought out.
Yeah, and this is not one of them. It's the keyboard approach is very different on this album.
That's true. Lyrically, I don't really have much to say about this one because again, even though we've got the typical Ian Anderson sort of vocabulary in this song, it just says what what it says on the tin, if I could put it like that. What would you say?
This is another one where the choice of vocabulary kind of bothers me a little bit. I think specifically using the word cranium in the chorus has always been a little weird to me. It just kind of sounds off. I never thought, like, why do you have to say cranium?
Why wouldn't you?
I mean, sure, people can say whatever they want, I guess, but to me it always just sounded like, is there really not a word that could have sounded better there than cranium?
I don't know, I like that part.
One thing I do like, this isn't really a lyric thing, but and a little very small thing, but at the very beginning I like the way the song starts is quite interesting, because it has kind of a sound of, kind of studio chatter almost in the way it starts, and I kind of like that. That's one thing that's missing completely from the TV version, of course.
Yeah, and it kind of connects us to Minstrel, where we also had these little studio snippets.
But yeah, I generally like this one, and it's one it's come a long way for me, because I've kind of reevaluated it over time. But it's not I don't think it's an amazing song. I wouldn't put it up there as one of the great Tull songs, but it's one that I can kind of appreciate now.
It's nice. And the lyrics, I like the line, a little touch of makeup, a little touch of bull.
Yeah, I think I never realized he was saying bull. I thought it was something else. Track 3, Salamander.
Born in the sun-kissed plain. Who was it?
So this track, it sounds very different from the rest of the album to me, where this song is one of the most intense acoustic Tull songs I've always felt, where there's a lot of really intense, fast picking for the majority of the song, and there's not much of the rest of the album is like that, so it's always kind of stuck out as a different one for me.
Yeah, I think if we compare it to obligatory Tull acoustic guitar numbers, this one kind of feels like the next level to me, because there's so much of intricate guitar work and with several guitars layered on top of each other. And I really like how when the other instruments come in, they don't replace the acoustic guitar.
Right.
The song still keeps being entirely driven by the guitar, and the flute and the bass just add depth and color, but they don't make the song feel different.
Yeah, I totally agree. The number one thing I like the most about it is how dreamy the vocals sound. I really love that about it. And it's not really a thing that Tull do a lot, that kind of style, but they really do a good job at, in the lyrics they mention Kensington Haze. And, I don't know if there's necessarily a connection, but I think the way that the vocals sound, it very much sounds like a haze, which it's really nice the way they're able to pull that off.
Yeah, it's very heavy on the effects, and I feel like Ian is doing a great job working with the vocal effects. I don't know whether he's been able to hear them when he was recording, but it certainly feels like he's specifically performing for it to sound good with these effects applied.
Yeah, I agree.
This is the one where we're getting a lot of tambourine up front, and I'm not sure if this is true, but this is the first Tull album where I'm noticing a lot of tambourine work. Like it's very front and center.
There's a lot of notes, yeah. There's of course tambourine on Thick as a Brick, which is pretty notable, but it's not played the same way as it is here.
Yeah, this is what I mean. I like the story about the name of the song and how it came about, how it actually was born out of the song was written because of the name, and the name Ian came up with it as a pun when he was thinking of a name for his rights company, and he called it Salamander and Son to make it, Anderson. And he thought, okay, then I must have a song called Salamander, and he wrote 2. And one of them is a bonus track on the remastered version.
Oh, Salamander's Ragtime, yeah.
Yeah, Salamander's Ragtime. It's quite a nice one, I think. So there was no super deep meaning behind the concept of Salamander before this song. Yeah. And it kind of retroactively added it, and I like that about it.
I think it does kind of... I know that lyrically it's supposed to be about a girl and sort of story-wise, but to me, removing that context, I think... when you think of a salamander, you think of, a desert setting, and I think this song actually does a pretty good job of making that place.
Yeah, that's true. It works both as a song about a woman, as a song about a mythical creature, a notion of an experience,
Yeah.
if you will.
The ending jam is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It kind of jams toward the end. I think it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, one of the things I like about the TV production, the video version for which that alternate recording was created, this song in particular, it's got a lady dancing to it, and it's got the band just sitting on the floor and playing, and it feels, like a fireside jam.
Yeah.
And that little video, which isn't really a brilliant video, but it feels very much what the song feels like, and I think that's a very successful one.
Yeah, I haven't watched that in a long time, but it sounds familiar, and I agree that it's kind of that kind of vibe of the song.
Track 4, Taxi Grab.
Nowhere to put your feet at the big store shoppers and the pavement's mean. Red lighters, pinstripes, short steps shoveling through the night.
Well, first off, the most kind of obvious thing about this song, the harmonica has come back.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't heard a harmonica since probably a stand-up, I think, on a Tull album. And also musically on this song, I made up a story about this in my head. I imagine it went like this. Ian thought, don't we have an awful lot of chords in Tull songs always, all of the time? Let's just write a song that's just one chord.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe let's add a few other chords on the chorus, just break it up, make it less monotonous. But it's kind of a unique Tull song, which is in the verse. It's purely riff-driven. We're always sitting on the same root all of the time, just that B. And the riff kind of makes it less monotonous, but if you listen to the bass part, it kind of becomes obvious that we're sitting all the time in the same place. We've had sort of a movement, an idea like that in Crazed Institution, but there was lots of oblique motion between the sort of non-diatonic intervals, like little chromatic additions, and it's completely missing from this song. This is just a kind of a bluesy, one-note sort of musical idea.
Yeah, this song, for me, to be honest, I think is actually a candidate for one of the worst Tull album tracks. At least of the 70s. But yeah, this is a big low point for me. It just sounds super generic, and it kind of plays into the generic criticism I have of a lot of this album. The one good thing I'll say about it is I actually quite like the guitar during I was calling it the chorus, but we talked about it before, and it's just sort of the pre-chorus, I guess. But I guess it's a sliding. Is it a slide?
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the pre-verse where the lyrics go, "No place to put your feet," I actually quite like the guitar in the back there. I think that's pretty cool. But that's kind of the only positive thing I can really say about this song, to be honest.
What do you think about the kind of a westerny, slidey guitar part in the middle?
Yeah, that's part of what I don't like about it. It just sounds so forced and so cheesy in a bad way.
That's interesting. I don't mind this song a lot. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I don't think I wouldn't think to skip it when listening to the album. Well, I don't normally skip any songs when listening to any albums. So that's kind of a moot point.
I don't mind the outro, like the very end, the da-da-da-da-da.
The fake-out ending.
Yeah. There's a really cool drum part there, kind of focused on the ride bell, which is kind of cool. And so that part's not bad, I think. But this is a hard pass for me on this one.
Yeah, well, there's very little that stands out in this song. I will concede. But having a harmonica song on a later Tull album is kind of a thing of itself.
Yeah, I had never really noticed the absence of harmonica, but I guess it's kind of obvious when you think about it. Track 5, From a Deadbeat to an Old Greaser.
From a deadbeat to an old greaser.
This is a pretty interesting one. It feels important in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but it feels like quite an important song, almost kind of personal. I don't think it is personal, but in a way it kind of has that feeling.
I think it has that feeling by virtue of how it's constructed musically.
Yeah.
I think like with many songs, Ian just makes up characters and writes songs about them.
Right.
I don't think he's associating himself with any of these characters, because it's pretty clear that he's not thinking of himself as an old greaser, because he's never been one for the rock and roll lifestyle. I like this song, and I looked at how the harmony works in it. And I think there's a very interesting thing to be said about it. It's sort of difficult to pinpoint the key that the song is in, because there's a couple of substitutions. There's the way the harmony keeps wandering, which I think is kind of the point. But I'm prepared to make a case that the song is in E flat, and E flat is the chord that appears in the structure exactly once on the first line of every verse. So not once in the song, but once in the structure, in the repeated extended chord loop that we're dealing with. And I think it's very befitting to the topic that the characters in this song, both characters, these are people who don't really have a home anymore. No, these are people whose home is in the past, home in a general sense, in the sense of a place where they belong. And when they are the people of the past, they don't belong anymore.
Yeah.
And the fact that we only get home for a moment just to leave it immediately, right, on that first chord from a dead beat, and then we move on and never come home again until the next verse, and then we move on immediately again. That in itself is a statement about these people that really, really befits the theme of the song. And notably, we don't even end on the home chord. We just end before it.
Yeah, I quite like that, actually.
So no one's returning home ever.
I had never thought of it that way musically.
Neither have I. I just kind of took a listen, played through it a couple times, and then I think it made sense. What do you think of the Dee Palmer's saxophone solo on this one, which is separately credited on the album and has been on the original edition as well? It's called A Late Night Sax Solo.
Yeah, I really like the bridge in general.
Mm-hmm.
Just if that bridge wasn't there, and when I say bridge, I don't mean just the sax solo, but kind of that entire part where the band kind of breaks in.
Mm-hmm.
If that bridge wasn't there, this song would be too boring for me. But I think that bridge really kind of saves it, because it really shows there's like a very strong evolution of the song throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the sax solo. I think it's played very differently from how a lot of the Ian sax sounds, which is interesting.
Sure, certainly. I think this saxophone solo is a great example of taste, because in a song where it would have been very, very easy to play a really, really schmaltzy sax tune with sugary jazz licks, and you could even get away with it, because the scene has been set for this kind of horrific saxophone player in a dive bar.
Yeah.
Dee Palmer instead provides a very complimentary response type sort of counterpoint to the melody that's provided by the guitars. And it still conjures up the image of a smoke-filled after-hours jazz pub.
Yeah.
But it kind of magically avoids all the inevitable musical cliches by taking this step back and playing very unresolved, circumventive, if I could say it like that, lines around them. That these lines don't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
And it helps the point of the song very much.
Mm-hmm. But now that I think about it, there's actually a video on YouTube, maybe you've seen this, of Dee playing this song.
Uh-huh.
Not on sax, but on keyboards and singing it at, I think, some Tull convention somewhere. But that always stuck in my mind just because this is a very odd song to choose to play, an odd Tull song.
I don't think I've seen it. I must go and find it.
Yeah, it's pretty odd.
What felt very surprising for me on the TV version of the song, that Ian doesn't sing the reverse line to a dead beat from an old greaser at the end.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
He just sings from a dead beat to an old greaser, and it felt odd because I thought the reverse was the point.
Yeah.
Where the characters switch places.
Yeah, I like that at the end, how there's a switch, the other character sort of responds at the end, which, I don't really understand this song. I don't really know what it's about, but I think it's cool how they, in the studio version at least, they kind of have that switch where the character responds at the very end, and it's a very curt reply, because I think you must have me all wrong. If it's the price of a pint you need, ask me again.
Well, I think that thematically it's kind of clear what the song is about, because most of it is not about the old greaser, the rock and roll person. It's about the beatnik.
Right. Yeah.
And the imagery that described is very much of the beatnik era. The coffee bars, the sax players listening to Parker reading Kerouac and looking at René Magritte paintings.
Yeah, which, by the way, this is another song where the lyrics bother me a little bit. or like name dropping authors and that kind of thing, and the whole line about their instruments of torture and young queers with old faces. Some of that stuff is just kind of too much for me.
Well, I think the name dropping is just, scene setting to me. But I agree that there may be too much of it. But on the other hand, this song is about characters. And one of the specific things about these types of characters, especially like the beatnik type person, they would be talking about their heroes a lot of the time. They would be discussing that, and it kind of shows what's on their mind.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say when I sort of complain about the diction and the lyrics and stuff is sometimes I feel like he's sort of straining the rhythmic pattern of the songs to try to fit in some of these like larger words, which in my opinion aren't always necessary.
Yeah, I know what you mean, especially in this one, because you've got to bend the rhythm a little bit to incorporate like 3 names in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think this song is quite brilliant in its own way.
Yeah, it's nice. I'm not crazy about it, but I like how it sounds. It sounds very important. Mm-hmm. If that may sound a little odd to say, but I kind of appreciate that. I appreciate how it's kind of more of a quiet, reflective moment on the album compared to a lot of the rest of it. And I really like how the bridge kind of evolves. It's kind of like a flower that ripens or something. Mm-hmm. So those are the things I kind of appreciate about it.
Track 6, Bad-Eyed and Loveless.
Yes, and she's bad-eyed, and she's loveless.
This, in my mind, feels a little bit related to Salamander, by virtue of it being the acoustic guitar number, but this is one that's really stripped down to just the guitar and voice. Harkens back a little bit to Minstrel in the Gallery, but it sounds so different to any song on Minstrel in the Gallery.
Yeah,
and it has a kind of more of a bluesy feel. Mm-hmm. That's again, it may be conjuring up the era that the story in the album wants to portray. What do you think?
I think this track, it feels really filler to me. Kind of every track on the album, this one feels the most filler. Like they just kind of had an outtake that they wanted to append onto it. Uh-huh. Yeah, I think it was kind of an odd choice to put this one and Deadbeat back to back in the sequencing, although I know that they're on different sides, but
yeah, that's true.
It's kind of odd putting the 2 like quiet acoustic ones next to each other.
Well, Bad-Eyed and Loveless isn't that quiet. It has a different feel to it. I will disagree with it being filler because I have other ideas of where the filler is on this album, and we're not there yet. I like the very intricate guitar work on this one. Yeah, I think Ian has been really growing as a guitar player, and Salamander and Bad-Eyed and Loveless testament to that. And it would have been filler, if they made it longer, but it's a very short song.
Yeah, I remember him mentioning in the booklet, I'm not going to get this right technically, but he mentioned that Salamander and this song shared a lot of kind of the same guitar technique he was sort of using a lot of the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wasn't it written in an open tuning?
Yeah, that sounds right. Again, I don't like the lyrics on this one.
I will probably agree with this.
Especially lines like, she's a warm fart at Christmas and that kind of thing.
Well, that's tongue-in-cheek very much. I think I have more of a problem with I'm self-raising and I flower in her company.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Specifically flower, because self-raising is par for the course with Ian's innuendos. I don't mind them. But the flower pun is kind of too much.
I guess one positive thing I'll say about it, which is a really funny little thing, but the sound of the pick hitting the guitar body at the end is very satisfying. It's one of those just like satisfying sounds.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It doesn't sound like the pick. I think it sounds like the palm of the hand or the finger.
Oh yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it would have more click to it if it were the pick.
I don't have a lot to add on this one, really. I think, it's quite bare bones, which is sort of part of why I think it's filler. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I can see how some would appreciate it, but it doesn't do much for me.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
Track 7, Big Dipper.
Big Dipper riding. Oh, we'll give the local at the high
So this one's kind of interesting. This is just one of those tracks on the album that I feel like it's not bad. You know, I don't particularly think it's very good or great, but I think it's fine, you know. I like the kind of cymbal flash sound, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like the whoosh, and it's kind of more prominent on the TV mix, I feel like, but I kind of like that little bit of studio trickery thing.
Yeah. I think this is kind of, to me, this is a pretty silly song.
Yeah.
It's similar in this regard to Quiz Kid.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the silliness, it more than makes up for it on the musical side. There's these, I think, maybe tape manipulated cymbals in the intro. There's the keyboards part that is really fun.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
The phased out guitar in the chorus. We've got unlike Quiz Kid, which has, I think, 4 distinct feels. This one has 2, but it's pretty nice, I think. And you can see how some of the songs on Songs from the Wood grew from the experiments they did in songs like Quiz Kid and Big Dipper.
Yeah, I suppose so. Never thought about that before. I think on this song, one of the things I like the most is that phased guitar you mentioned, and especially on the chorus when everything else kind of cuts out on the, you know, Big Dipper on a Weekend. I think that sounds really good with the guitar in the back. Yeah,
that's when this kind of guitar sound is the most effective, because it adds space to it.
Yeah. Now that you mention, you know, I guess you can kind of draw a line between this kind of guitar tone and the guitar tone of like Hunting Girl or something.
Mm-hmm.
I've never made that connection before.
Yeah, that's part of what I mean. I also like in the chorus, the acoustic guitar is just plays stabs, and they sound like the stabs that would be traditionally played by horns, like the horns on Quiz Kid.
Yeah.
But there are no horns in this one. It's just the acoustic guitar that's, you know, enough to make it pop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Lyrically, there's quite a bit of geographic referencing, which that might sound a bit odd, but it's always kind of notable to me in Tull songs when sort of like, real world locations are brought up. I actually, a couple of years ago, some of you listening may have seen this, but a couple of years ago on the Facebook group, I made a Google map of every real world location ever mentioned in a Tull song.
Wow.
Through the whole discography, so I should pull that up again.
Yeah, you should. I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, I'll send that to you. It's kind of cool. You mentioned the Glasgow train is the main one I think of in this song.
Yeah, well, this is a Blackpool song, I think.
Yeah.
It describes it as. So it's got a lot of hometown features, a lot of scenes that are built on his experience.
Yeah, on the pleasure beach on Blackpool Promenade. I've never been to Blackpool, so I can't really speak, but.
Generally, I think that the kind of the melodic riff that this song is built on and revolves around this, to me, it really sounds like, you know, a seminal song for the folk rock period. It already, you know, feels like ideas from Songs from the Wood are beginning to germinate. Yeah,
I've never thought of that, but I can kind of see where you're coming from. This song to me is actually, for whatever reason, I've always kind of associated this song with a strip cartoon. Which was not really an outtake because it was recorded before this album, but it was sort of recorded around the same time. But it kind of has a sort of similar feel to me.
Yeah, I don't think Strip Cartoon has been a particularly memorable outtake for me.
I actually quite like it. It's a very innocent sounding Tull song.
Well, it's an innocent sounding Tull song about a sleazy politician.
Yeah.
I think from the outtakes. My highlight is a small cigar.
It's not mine. I'll just say that much.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to say more because I will be mentioning it again.
Okay. I only remember ever listening to that song once, but I remember vehemently not liking it, and so I never listened to it again.
No, it's one of my really favorite songs.
But that was a real outtake for this album, I think. Like that was actually recorded for the album.
Yeah, and it's referenced in Pied Piper as well.
Yeah.
Well, partly referenced if we've got the small cigar element. Track 8, Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die.
Now it's too old to rock and roll, but it's too young to die.
This is the kind of one of the most famous Tull songs, I guess.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of radio play, and very much like Aqualung, it's a famous Tull song that doesn't have any flute on it,
Yeah.
which always felt very, very strange to me. He could have added a little bit of a toot, just to make it, evident that it's Jethro Tull. I think this is Jethro Tull's very first power ballad.
Yeah, I would agree.
There's lots of, uplifting musical movement that you would hold up a lighter to and sway from side to side. But I think what makes it compelling, unlike, a typical AOR power ballad, is how they move from key to key, because it's not really noticeable because it's done in a very, very clever manner. But this song is actually in 3 keys. The first half of the verse is in C, and then the second half of the verse is in G. It moves there by recontextualizing the G as the 1 instead of the 5 of C, if any of our listeners know what I'm talking about. And then it kind of surreptitiously lands us in what I think feels like F in the chorus by a very swift modulation. But we don't spend too much time in the same key in any part of the song. The most I think we do is in the second verse, which is longer than the other ones, and they add brass to color things in, and add excitement. And we are always moving from one key to another, and it keeps these things interesting, which I think kind of is a saving grace for the more straightforward power ballady feeling that's in this song.
This is another one of those songs where it's really funny to me how this became such a big hit for the band, because like a lot of their popular songs, it's not a song which is a good representation of what Tull are as a band, because I think on this song specifically, they were very obviously trying to do kind of a pastiche style song of like an old AOR power ballad song. And so in that sense, it's just kind of funny how, they go with the intention of trying to make, maybe a modern day for the 70s, a modern day version of that kind of song, that kind of popular song, and then it ends up becoming an actual popular song for the band.
Yeah, well, sort of what they did with Thick as a Brick.
Yeah.
Partly less impactful and partly more impactful manner, because this song has become such a hit.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were really successful in writing this particular song, because, as I said, it's really clever, and it doesn't get boring because of that, because we're kept moving through it. It's not repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
It repeats the same chord structure, but the chord structure is complex enough for it not to feel repetitive.
I think it's a great song, but it's always had kind of that odd, unsettling sense of inauthenticity, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I just mean that in they were trying to, be a different kind of band who was sort of covering a different style.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's bad or that they shouldn't have done that, but I'm just saying that it's really just funny to me how, of all the songs to be big, it was, that kind of thing, which isn't representative of, who the band are.
Yeah, that's true. This is one of the more straightforward storytelling songs on the album.
Yeah, probably the biggest one.
And this is probably the one song where I don't mind it, because this story is the point of the song, the point of the name. And if this was the only place where we'd have the, Ray kind of taking center stage, it would have been enough, I think. I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I love the brass on this track, like you mentioned, especially when it kind of comes in on the second verse. It sounds so good. Not just the parts they're playing, but just like the way they were mic'd or something just sounds really fantastic.
Yeah, they're really well recorded. They have so much pop and so much impact.
It's also worth noting on the last verse something very rare in Jethro Tull, which is female vocals, which you can count on one hand the number of times that happens across the discography. So that's interesting.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and they're credited, I think, on the record, Maddie Pryor.
Yeah, from Steel Eye Span.
Oh, really?
Band that Ian was known for working with. He produced one of their albums.
But there are actually two other songs on this album that have a female vocal, because we've got Angela Allen singing on Crazed Institution and on Big Dipper.
Big Dipper I don't hear at all.
Not as noticeable.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that now.
Appropriately, in this song, we could look at the credits once again, because we've got in the credits special thanks to Ray Lomas for the use of the name Ray Lomas.
Yeah, that's funny.
Do you have any idea whether that was a real person, or were they just covering, like, if there is a person in the world called Ray Lomas, we've got to thank him?
No, I remember reading in the booklet that he says that Ray Lomas was a real person they knew.
I don't think I read that part.
They actually asked him his permission to use his name, which is kind of funny.
No, that's great.
One thing I think is worth mentioning is there was a video for this song. And it's quite interesting because it was part of the Slipstream video compilation, which, Tull fans may know, but that video didn't come out until 1980, which was a couple years later. And I remember the first time I saw that video being very confused. Because it was too old to rock and roll, but I was thinking, why is Eddie Jobson there? Because it's the band from A, because it was done in 1980. But there's not a lot of Tull music videos, but of all of the Tull videos, I think this one is my favorite. It's genuinely like really funny. There's sort of a scene on the last verse where Ian is sort of, he's on a motorcycle flying through the sky, and it's very obviously just kind of like a little screen held in back of him, and there's like sort of like birds on strings that are kind of flying by him in the back, and there's another scene where he's on a ship for some reason. He's like a sailor on a ship. And the very first shot of that verse is he comes up out of the smokestack and immediately throws up over the end before starting to sing that verse. I always thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, I don't think there are, for me, any Jethro Tull videos that are unequivocally great.
Yeah, I agree.
But that one's pretty funny.
The end of this song, turns into like total 50s madness, kind of like Hot Patootie from Rocky Horror.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
But I appreciate it. I think the ending is a little cheesy, but the whole song is cheesy, so I appreciate it. I think the whole moral of the song, where they kind of resolve with you're never too old to rock and roll. It's kind of cute, I guess.
Yeah, I think the ending kind of betrays the intention to make this song into a kind of not a parody, but sort of a pastiche, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But I think that humor was a little bit lost when the song became a hit, because when a song like that becomes a hit, people take it at face value.
Yeah, and the fact that everybody thought this song was autobiographical. It's kind of achieved the same status in like the quote unquote classic rock pantheon as the Who's singing "I Hope I Die Before I Get Old," and now they're extremely old, still playing music.
Yeah, that's true.
Track 9, Pied Piper.
Trail along, my leather jacket's buttoned up, and my four-stroke song will pick you up.
So I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this one, but for me, this is actually one of the most overlooked songs on the album. I really, really like this song.
Well, this is kind of exciting, because if you remember on War Child, we've had an unprecedented agreement, right, on which songs we consider to be the best and which songs we consider to be the worst. And I'm happy to announce that on this album, we seem to be in complete opposite places. Because in my notes, what I have written for this song, the first line that I wrote in my notes about this song is filler, filler, filler.
Oh, that's sad.
I don't like this. The only place I like in this song is the little pre-chorus insertion, which is then repeated in the coda with the words "Pied Piper, Mad Biker" sang over it. But it feels, first of all, for me like the story aspect has been taken too far. I really don't like this. I really don't like the beginning. Now, if you think Ray blew it, that's kind of a cringy moment for me. And apart from that little flute moment that I mentioned, it's musically pretty uninteresting for me. And, well, there's also the controversial, theme of the song that doesn't really do it any favors either.
So the reasons I like it are all musical. It's not a lot to do with the lyrics. I think the continuation of the story, to me, it was kind of clever when I first heard it, but I think the problem, which is kind of a problem of the entire album and not necessarily just this song, is that it doesn't really go anywhere. I mean, if you're listening to this album for the first time, you may recognize, okay, there was some kind of, continuation between these two songs, but it doesn't feel like this song really, progresses the story or whatever story there is. I think the thing that I love the most about it is the effects on the guitar and keyboards during the chorus part and sort of the delay going on, where it really gives the music this feel like it's floating in the air, which I think it kind of matches some of the lyrics in a way, because there's a point where he says, my schoolgirl fancy is floating in free flight, and it has that floating feel to it, which is really interesting to me. It's kind of a very like light, sort of fluffy feel, and I love how the guitar there's different kind of guitar melodies that change throughout the verses, or the choruses rather, and so on the last chorus the guitar is following the vocal where it wasn't doing that before. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but kind of in general, they combined together. To me, this song feels like a soundtrack to a happy ending of a film. It's kind of the cheesy part where we're being showed the characters being happy after some drama. It's kind of an equivalent of that in a romantic comedy or something like that.
Yeah, I can see that, I guess.
And really, this is where the flow of the album, for me, completely falls flat.
One of the funniest things about it to me is just the title, just because it almost kind of sounds like if you asked artificial intelligence to create a Jethro Tull song title, it would create Pied Piper or something. It's just kind of funny.
Yeah, that's probably true. I think about the theme of the song and the lyrics, there's a lot of explanation in the Stephen Wilson booklet. I don't have a big problem with it because it's quite clear that it's been written from a kind of a more innocent point of view, where they didn't really think there was anything wrong with that. They could have maybe thought more, and even you've mentioned The Who, and there have been rock songs written around the theme of abuse, like Tommy, like the song On Tommy, where Tommy is molested by his uncle. And so partly this song feels a little bit thoughtless to me, but maybe they were in that sort of rock and roll era headspace where all of that was all right and no one was hurt.
Yeah, I mean, I think, he addresses it in the booklet where he didn't mean to, I guess, downplay the effects of it, which is sort of what I guess the criticism would be of something like this. But I mean, my two responses to that would just be, number one, this is rock and roll. I mean, I think nothing is off limits here. And number two, I just think it's a little silly to try to reevaluate something from 30, 40 years ago in...
Oh, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Nothing is to be gained by reevaluating it. It's just, it's like one of these songs that you won't be singing to yourself.
Sure, yeah.
Right? So it has a place in history. It has a place in the discography. It's a thing. There is no malicious intent behind it. But like, I don't know, Run for Your Life by the Beatles.
Sure, yeah.
It's just not something you will be, humming without having second thoughts.
Yeah. But I think he's playing a character, so I think it's very much within that vein.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
The only lyric that really kind of makes me cringe is the one about the tenant in my skin tight jeans. That's another one of those things where it's like, just why do you have to word it that way? It's just it's a very weird way of wording things.
I think it says tenor.
Oh, tenor. Okay, I thought it was tenant.
Yeah. No.
I think it's still cringy either way.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't know, this is one of my most played on the album. I still, even today, I play this one a lot. The chorus sounds really good to me. I love kind of the sound design on it.
I'm surprised, but I like that you like it because, between us, we've got to like them all.
Yeah, believe me, there's a lot more Tull stuff that everybody else hates that I love, which we'll see as we go into the 80s. So,
well, I don't know if everyone hates this song. It's just I have a problem with it.
Yeah, what does everybody think? We'll see.
Track 10, The Checkered Flag, brackets, Dead or Alive.
Well, isn't it grand to be laying to the sand, dead or alive? Isn't it grand?
This is another one. I'm sad to say this is another one that feels like filler to me. And to continue the metaphor that I used for Pied Piper, which was the final scene of a movie where we see the characters being happy. This is where the titles roll.
Yeah.
This is the song that will play when the titles are rolling. And depending on whether you want to pretend that you're watching a movie or not, this song is necessary or it isn't. Because musically, it tries to do the exact same thing as the title song. It also has that power ballady feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Little elements of nostalgia, but it feels less inventive and less musically interesting. It's a fine song, it's well played, but I don't know, I kind of resent it trying to lean so hard into these nostalgic musical devices with the strings that start sounding kind of schmaltzy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that this song doesn't elicit an emotional response in me and that I'm not enjoying it, but I kind of, is one of those situations when I feel guilty about enjoying a thing. I've been looking at the song, I've been looking at the harmony that's used there, so for that reason, it's over the past few days, it's been stuck in my head, and it's kind of one of those things that's stuck in your head and you're thinking, really? That's what my brain is going with. The emotional response that it elicits has so much baggage that the response falls apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd personally call it filler in my mind. I don't think it's a great song, but I don't know, I more or less like it. It's kind of interesting that, you mentioned it's kind of in the same vein as the title track in terms of trying to be kind of a pastiche of like a different style of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely see that, but for whatever reason, this one feels more authentic to me than the title track.
Really?
And I don't, when I say authentic, I don't mean in a good or bad way, because I think the title track is a better song than this one overall.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, I kind of buy this song more than I buy the title track, like the intention behind it or something, the feeling behind it.
Well, yeah, it's kind of constructed using more. I keep feeling like we're being led on, when listening to it, when the kind of uplifting moment that the song creates is artificial.
Yeah, I agree, it's artificial. It's kind of, when you mentioned the strings, it kind of made me think of like the same way the strings are used on Good Night by the Beatles, which I'm not trying to say these two songs are comparable necessarily, but the way the strings are used, it's kind of in like a very obviously kind of in a facetious way, like in a very grand like movie soundtrack style.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So for me, like you did with War Child, like when you said you've been happy if one of the songs had been replaced with Saturation. I'd be pretty happy if the last track, actually, the final track on Too Old to Rock and Roll, had been A Small Cigar. I would have loved that very much.
It'd be very much kind of an afterthought type song, right? To be at the end of the album.
It kind of would, but it also has an epilogue kind of feel, instead of a titles rolling kind of feel. And I know you said you don't like that song, but I do. I feel like the storytelling and the character telling, the kind of character that unfolds in that song is much richer than Ray Lomas has ever been in the course of this album. And it's clearly a different character than Ray Lomas. So if they, since they wanted to stick with the story in this album, it's understandable why they threw it out, because it's an entirely different person there. But if we reduced the album from the soundtrack to a story to just a collection of songs which are related or not related thematically, then I think A Small Cigar would fit very well, and the kind of mood that it creates would fit very well at the end of the album.
Funnily enough, don't ask me why, but I actually have a playlist in my music library of this album with Salamander switch for strip cartoon. And I don't really know why. I just have that there, and I've listened to it actually quite a lot. I'm not sure why.
That's interesting.
On the Checkered Flag, I like the spaciness of it, like particularly in the beginning, because it's not really a thing that you hear Tull do a lot in that kind of style. And it very much, the spaciness kind of goes away towards the end because it gets very epic with the string build-up and all that kind of thing. But the very sort of spaced out sparse guitar at the beginning is kind of interesting.
Yeah, a little similar to the guitar on the title song. But yeah, there is less space put on the instruments in the title song, because in the title it kind of begins in a more subdued way, like we're closer to the performer
Yeah. Lyrically, it seems like it's a lot of kind of seemingly unrelated vignettes. It's a little mysterious in that regard.
Yeah, it's like it elicits a feeling composed of around the themes of racing and winning and being the winner.
Some of it has always felt a little bit autobiographical to me, just in the sense of, isn't it grand to be playing to the stands that are alive? It just seems to me like, as somebody who would be a touring musician playing in stadiums and arenas and literally playing to the crowd, that some of that would have kind of a personal resonance to it.
Probably, yeah. I think Ian said multiple times that he would be carried from the stage feet first.
And I actually quite like the strings, even though I know they're kind of cheesy, but particularly I think it's towards the third verse where there's that string part that goes the da 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 da. I quite like that.
Well, they're very well arranged, of course.
Yeah. So in conclusion, how do you feel about this one as a whole? I know we talked about it a bit in the intro, but when you kind of think of it in relation to the other albums, how does it fit for you?
I think, well, I still like this one more than most 80s albums. There's, I think, one 80s album that I like a lot, and the rest of them I think I would rate lower than Too Old to Rock and Roll. I agree it's not a brilliant album, and probably my take on it with kind of, I would like the storytelling to be removed and it made into a more of a collection of songs. A lot of people may well disagree with it, but overall I think it's a good effort.
Yeah, my feelings on it, I think, kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, is that I just think it's very uncohesive as a whole, one of the most uncohesive Tull albums. And I think there's parts of it that are quite bad for me and that feel very uninspired. But there's also other parts of it that, I may not think that a lot of the tracks on here are great, but there's some songs in here that I think are actually quite overlooked, and they're actually pretty good. They're sort of overlooked gems maybe. But yeah, there's two 70s Tull albums that for me are sort of below everything else, sort of War Child in this one. But I think I prefer this one to War Child, just in that I would rather listen to it more, but it's I think it's definitely one of the weaker efforts of sort of the classic era.
I'm not sure to which of these I would listen more, because they are kind of on par for me. Maybe right now I'm in an emotional place where I would be listening to War Child more, but I don't think it won't change tomorrow,
What are your favorite and least favorite tracks?
Well, unlike some albums, this one's pretty easy for me to pick the favorite and the least favorite. My favorite two tracks, I will pick two on either side. My favorite two tracks are Crazed Institution and Salamander. And of those two, I think Crazed Institution is probably my favorite track on the album in general, because it's so interesting, it's so fascinating, it's so, in some places, not very typical for Tull, but also brilliant. And my two least favorite tracks are also next to each other, and I think I've already mentioned which ones these were. These are Pied Piper and the Checkered Flag, because I really don't like how they close the album. Yeah,
Pied Piper is kind of a weird later track when I think about it. Especially if you consider Checkered Flag as sort of credits rolling, then Pied Piper is kind of a weird conclusion.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of the happy ending, which rubs me entirely the wrong way. So what about you?
So speaking of Pied Piper, those are my favorite tracks. Pied Piper is for sure a favorite for me. And I would probably also mention Quiz Kid. I think that's a pretty good song.
Yeah, that's a great song.
If I had to pick a third one, I'd probably include Too Old to Rock and Roll. And I feel a little weird about that song just because it's, again, one of those songs that it's so big that I'm not really sure how exactly I feel about it today. But, I mean, it's clearly a good song. I don't mean to put it down. And so I would probably put it up there as one of my favorites. For least favorites, I just have two that stick out to me above everything else, and that's Taxi Grab and Bad-Eyed and Loveless. Those are for sure my bottoms.
Yeah, I kind of sussed that. I don't have much to defend these songs in particular. I've said what I think about them. So, apart from Pied Piper, I don't think we're in much of a disagreement, because I really like Quiz Kid.
Everybody listening, I'd be interested to hear how you feel about this album, because like we said in the beginning, I don't feel this is an album that gets talked about a lot among fans, and I'd be curious to know what you guys think about some of the, I guess, sort of less listened to album tracks, things like Pied Piper and Quiz Kid and Crazed Institution and these kinds of things.
Yeah, I'd like to know what people think of Crazed Institution, because I really don't see much discussion about that song in particular.
I remember there's a pro shot video of this tour in 76. I think it was in the US somewhere, I think in Florida. And I don't remember exactly what all songs they played from this album, but I know they played Crazed Institution on that show, so there's a live version of that on there.
Yeah, and of course the imitation live version in the TV special.
Thanks everybody for listening as always. We hope you're enjoying listening along to the Tull discography as we are. And we'll see everybody in 2 weeks with Songs from the Wood, beginning the folk trilogy. Let us know what you think about Too Old to Rock and Roll, what you think about these sort of rarer, less known tracks. What are your favorites from this album? What are your least favorites? Let us know, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with Songs from the Wood.
Bye. Cheers.